we're talking about this huge energy crisis, and of course, the very, very alarming increase in pricing in energies. But even though Mr. Macron has come out and proclaimed doom with this end of abundance, this is really the product of many years of decisions. But behind all this, there's a much bigger picture about consumption and demand and renewables. And I'd like to just spend a few minutes talking about those complexities. Today, 930 million people, about 20% of the world population, has no reliable access to electricity. Now, this is centered in the Southern Hemisphere, but unfortunately, in Europe, this is a growing problem as energy prices have increased. We start hearing dire stories across all of developed Europe about people who are having to make decisions between heating and food. Beyond that, nearly 1/3 of the world's population still uses wood to cook. And this is another major environmental problem, causes deforestation, erosion, and huge loss of habitats around the world. And you can see this if you fly in to Haiti. Along the border between Haiti and the Dominican Republic, you can see a clear line. The Dominican Republic is green. It's a jungle. On the Haitian side, it's dry, almost desertic, heavily eroded, and not a tree to be seen. And what's happened? Well, Haiti, being a tremendously poor place, depends on wood for cooking, and they've deforested the country. Dominican Republic, being slightly richer, less populated, is able to supply most of its heating needs either through electricity or natural gas. And this is the stark consideration we have to think. It's not only carbon emissions that we have in Northern Europe. Environmental damages are also being caused at the lower end of the energy economy. And those, even though we don't talk about it, our carbon sinks of forests are disappearing because of not providing reliable energy to people. And, the other thing to think about today is, we've seen the news of reactivating coal plants that were supposed to be eliminated, but coal is still producing. It's still a huge energy source for some of the largest energy consuming countries in the world. And coal, when you really think about it again, is a major environmental degrading contributor, because not only do we have the CO2 emissions, but we have very high levels of nitrous emissions, sulfur emissions, and other particulates. Tremendous satellite maps. If you look at the paths that travel from the exhaust traveling from German and Polish plants across the Finnish and Swedish forests, where those exhausts travel, the forests are incredibly degraded. You can almost see you can see a change in the character of those forests. The ones that aren't under the exhaust plumes are nice and green, and the other ones are sickly brown. And the other thing I'd like to just stand out in consumption, Europe and Romania, importantly, Romania and Bulgaria, have high levels of energy poverty, and it's increasing. And this is something that we have to think about for our future. How do we have an equitable energy market that supplies energy to all, as well as still being profitable, providing taxes and monies to the state, and meeting our climate goal? it's a pretty tough challenge. How do we do this? Well, there are some answers to the future. We will make a transition. For those of us who are old enough, and it's amazing how many people who are in business today don't remember the hole in the ozone layer. We were able to fix that. And in my youth, American rivers in the early 1970s were so contaminated that the rivers would regularly catch fire. And today those rivers are recreational areas, fishing areas, and we've really cleaned up the water. So we can make environmental change in human time with concerted effort, legal and governmental policy frameworks that support this, and a huge amount of capital deployment in those directions. And we're going to have to do a lot of that because we're talking about displacing about 65% of our fuel sources if we truly go carbon neutral by 2050. So eliminating biofuels, wood, coal, oil, gas. But at the same time, coal consumption, coal energy generation is growing incredibly. So how do we go and eliminate, we have a mandate, a political mandate to eliminate one or three of our major electrical generating sources, while at the same time, electrical demand is growing worldwide. And even though renewables are increasing the amount of energy contribution of the energy mix, it's exponential growth. And, look at this, $11 trillion. So that's a million billion, huge numbers will go into these investments. But there's a big but in this. Deployment times are long. Offshore wind farms are 7 to 10 years to bring online after license, after getting the original license. Nuclear reactors, not part of this graph, but the most recent ones, 17 years behind schedule and several billion euros over budget. And even though renewables are growing exponentially, they won't overtake the contribution to the electrical or to the energy markets till after the goal times of 2030. So oil and gas still has a place in this market, and it's going to be very complex because we can add solar, we can add wind, but that's a variable component. And, this is one of the problems for high cost in Europe for our electricity, because even though we have a fairly large contribution from solar and wind, those are variable. We have to have gas plants or nuclear reactors on standby to immediately turn on and start producing electricity when the wind stops blowing or when clouds pass over. So we really need reliable, constant baseload generation. Hydropower, largest renewable energy in the world, but we don't see a lot of opportunity to build that. Geothermal, I'm in love with geothermal. It has so much application. It can be used in both very, very hot areas, or much less hot areas. What we're learning with technological development in geothermal is it's really almost an every place solution. Geothermal only has one problem. Once you get that hot water to the surface, you have to use it on site because you rapidly start losing all of that heat energy as you transport the hot water. A long distance transport for geothermal water is about 20 kilometers, which is being done between the geothermal fields in Iceland to the capital in Reykjavik for district heating. So a lot of people talk about geothermal being a 0 kilometer solution. You have to use it where you produce it, either convert it to electricity, or as Tony Marino said, put it into houses as heating, or agricultural solutions. So, the future is fairly easy to see. We keep being told this all the time. What are we going to see? A constant push in industrialized countries to replace gasoline and other hydrocarbons as a fuel. Gas, where hydrocarbons cannot be substituted, will be a growing fuel. And I think the most significant thing that we have to admit and understand is outsourcing gas supply to unreliable partners is quite risky. Having a single supplier of our natural gas has demonstrated its risk to our economy and to our energy security and to our probably physical well-being this winter. So we're going to have a lot of volatility as we go up. And one thing I'd just like to make a point of, there's a lot of talk about hydrogen, but hydrogen does have some problems. In terms of volume, at any temperature and pressure, it probably has a little bit less than 1/4 the energy content of natural gas. Another way to put it is you'd have to store 4 times as much to get the same number of kilowatts. Talking to the Rolls-Royce turbine engineers, they believe that today they're probably 12 years away to having 100% hydrogen power turbine. Now you can run a lot of equipment on mixed natural gas plus hydrogen, where you're basically leaning your energy provision. But in the end, even though we talk about all this electrification, it's really transference of point of energy emissions or CO2 emissions from one point to another. And that's a good thing, because if we do, let's say, go electric with all of our vehicles, that means that at the electrical generation stations, we have enough scale where it's economic to remove CO2, sulfurs, nitrous, and particulates from the exhaust and deal with that either in CO2 sequestration or other methodologies. So our world is going to look a lot different in the future. And in all that, I still have to say that the gap exists today. We have high natural gas prices, astronomical natural gas prices, because there's a production gap. All of these other solutions that are available to us will have to be augmented by natural gas as part of each nation's energy mix. And it becomes more and more important for countries to start looking at natural gas and oil as part of their energy security solution. Now, what does that mean for an oil producer or an oil and gas contractor? And I just really have to, again, thank Tony for talking about this, because Vermilion, while he was there, really did become an ESG compliant energy company that embedded decarbonizing elements. And more in this industry, not only to have good press and good relations with your communities, you'll have to include elements for decarbonization and ESG, but also to get licensed to operate. And even more importantly for most companies, unless you're a huge beast that can completely run on your own internal cash flow, is financing. We see today that even the best development projects are challenged at raising funding in European and North American markets unless they have a viable, strong, and real ESG component. Not the famous greenwash, but really having elements. So, for example, in Hungary recently, we saw a company was able to raise funding for a gas project where they specifically stated in their development plan and in their investor presentations that geothermal was part of their plan. If the wells were unsuccessful, they would be converted to district heat generation. After the life of the gas well, after depletion, the wells would be converted to geothermal. And that was an important part of them to be able to be funded.
Sorry, Mr. Schultz, I will kindly ask you to near the closing, maybe 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'm one slide away.
Thank you.
So, as a contractor, our company, EPI, we have built our business around including all these things. So, not only is it the way to access money, to get government approvals, but it's a good way to run your business. It's viable, it's proven, and more and more, we have the tools and demonstrable models to bring this to business. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. We are fortunate enough to hear you throughout your presentation, and it was a very interesting one because there are some ideas not very common these days, and I think that is very important to also highlight this perspective. The boogeyman stays to be the coal and wood for fire, and gas is still to be here for many decades from now on.